So I know it's a bit tiring, but the next presentation will be inspiring us and waking us up if the mood is down, because the artistic examples are intriguing and provocative. And our next speaker and the last one in this panel is Emese Kürti, who is an art historian and researcher at the Museum of Fine Arts, Central European Research Institute for Art History, KEMKI, our partner today in Budapest. Previously, she was a researcher at Artpool Art Research Center, a lecturer at the Central European University, the CEU, and an art historian at the Ludwig Museum, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Budapest. She holds a PhD in film, media, and cultural theory from Eötvös Loránd University, and her dissertation was published by L'Harmattan in 2018. Her research focuses include transregional discourses of the new avant-garde in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia, the concept of minority and women's positions in experimental art. She is also the author of The Screaming Hole, Poetry, Sound and Action as Intermedia Practice in the work of Katalin Ladik, that was published at the ACB Research Lab in 2017. And the last book she co-edited with Zsuzsa László is What Will Be Already Exist, Temporalities of Cold War Archives in East Central Europe and Beyond, published by Transcript Verlag in 2021. Emese, the floor is yours, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much. I think it is here. Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction, also for inviting me. I'm happy to be here with you, all of you. And I'm trying to reflect a little bit on your previous introduction. And listening to your presentation, I just reminded late interview with Agnes Heller, a member of Budapest School of Philosophy, and who was asked about how she became a Marxist. And she said, well, you know, Georg Lukács was a great personality, and he was a Marxist, so I became a Marxist. So I just recall this example because I think there are so many aspects of Marxism we have to take into consideration beyond the ideology itself. And my topic is also refers somehow to this idea. Just one more sentence. As Christian told earlier, I was involved in transnational researches in recent years, but now I returned to my locality, let's say, and it's not necessarily a comfortable situation to write along the way to the book, but I dedicated myself to somehow to manage this and write a book on Szentjo, and this presentation is part of this bigger work. Okay. So in Your Privacy Matters, close, yeah. So in 2011 video work, Vasarely Go Home, made in connection with Viktor Vasarely's 1969 exhibition in Kunsthalle, Budapest, Andreas Fogarasi conducted interviews with the former participants, including Tamás Szentjo, a poet, visual artist, and actionist who significantly shaped the history of the Hungarian new avant-garde. In this video, critically reflecting on Vasarely's communism, Szentjo stated his own position as follows, I quote, "If I can put it in this way briefly, I was, am, and I will be a communist," quote ends. This statement may sound radical not only in terms of the self-understanding of an artist who is recorded in art history as an anti-communist dissident. The relationship to communism and its official ideology, Marxism, was an essential determinant of Eastern European intellectuals' cultural and political identity until the first half of the 1970s, which differed markedly from contemporary versions of Western European Marxism, fueled by critique of market capitalism. In Hungary, and as in some other countries of the region, The primary question was whether it was possible to reform Marxism, to which, following the positive trends, only the trauma of '69 provided the final answer. Even then, identification with communism was therefore possible in conjunction with a critique of communism, along with the fact that returning to the writings of the young Marx also meant rediscovering for Marxism for many. The compatibility of neo-avant-garde artistic circles with Marxism, which from a methodological point of view can contribute to counteracting heroic narratives, has often appeared in Hungary in association with other ideologies. This lecture will examine through the aesthetical philosophical program of Tamás Szentjo what alternative concepts of Marxism and neo-Marxism were preferred in the visual arts in Hungary at the turn of the 60s and 70s. How artists did combine two contradictory rival concepts of the 20th century, the theory of Marxism and its main categories such as collectivity, labor, and alienation, with the ideas of esoteric philosophy essentially focusing on the individual and the metaphysical approaches. These alternative concepts in arts and society not only challenge the dominance of Marxist discourses in the 60s and 70s, but we must also reckon with their influence in the shaping of utopian concepts and their subsequent interpretation. A peculiarity of the presence of esoteric philosophical discourses in the artistic practice is that, while they shape the structure of the underground scene in an identity-forming way, their influence is hardly visible in the historical narratives of the period. We are two of us present now, I think. Another significance of this topic is connected to the current post-utopian reality defined as illiberal by the ruling conservatives in Hungary and beyond, or post-fascism, among others, by some post-Marxist theorists. Post-fascism is to Central Europe, but is globally present under the protective armor of capitalism, which in its total exclusivity has made the imagination of alternative world order, ideas, and culture impossible. What is lost in post-fascism is the heterogeneity that, according to Georges Bataille, the homogeneous society rejects as waste in a world that prefers work, productivity and reproductivity, exchange, utility, and serenity. Bataille himself appears as an ultra-leftist extremist in a normative academic world, just as the sympathizers of his concept of the, I quote, useless can be found among figures of the neo-avant-garde attracted to utopia, such as Tamás Szentjo. In the 1960s and 70s, Szentjo appeared as an amateur actor in a number of mainstream and experimental films there in the middle. But in The Agitators, he portrayed himself as the anarchist Szentjo, an internal critic of the Communist Party's intellectual group. Dezső Magyar's 1969 film, which was not a couple of years ago screened in Cluj, so I found this poster for this event. So this 1969 film, which is a screenplay by Gábor Bódi, was made to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Hungarian Soviet Republic, the communist state that lasted from March to August 1919 and was banned immediately after its completion. The film did not aim to present a historical period as a documentary, but consists of intense and passionate moral dialogues related to the revolution of each time, to which the text of the intellectual base of the 1919 revolution, primarily the leftist writer Ervin Sinko and the Marxist philosopher Georg Lukács, were adapted. The texts were mostly performed by amateur actors selected from Gábor Bódi's circle of friends, who played important roles in the Budapest underground scene and also brought the spirit of the new left into the film. According to a contemporary description by a fellow poet, I quote, Tamás Szentjo was haughty in his veer of East Central European indifference and mockery. He walked in a straight line, looking tall, with blonde hair and a leather jacket, which he never took off, like a military officer on standby. Quote ends. The role of the anarchist played by Szentjo follows the original source, Elvit Shinko's novel Optimist, almost faithfully. Yet the conceptual consistency of his attitude with the text is striking. One important scene in Agitators takes place in a crowded cafe where Szentjo, standing on a podium and using Bataille's phraseology, announces in an impromptu speech that he is forming the Party of the Useless People, for which the ground rules are: all members must give thanks for what they are. Each member is expected to be comfortable in their skin. Thanks to you who made me what I am, a person who can say, I am no use to anyone. Thank you for saving me from the conceit of useful people. I don't believe that work enables. Szentjo lent his ideological critical principles and anti-labor rhetoric to the character, but these principles did not find a place in the revolutionary Soviet system. His character synthesis, a critique of the bureaucracy, the new elites, and the institutions, is stigmatized as a counter-revolutionary and executed in front of the Soviet headquarters. The anarchist was left alone again in the increasing dogmatism of the emerging Marxist elite, which, following the writings of Georg Lukács, accepted the doctrinaire and violent nature of revolution. In an interview, Szentjo says that he disagreed with the director's position that his anarchist character has to be a victim. However, like his cinematic alter ego, he stood his ground against the directors. Gábor Bódi chose him because he was aware of Szentjo's anarchist sympathies, so he seemed authentic for the role. But this position remained marginal within mainstream and neo-Marxist groups in 1999 and 1969 as well. The makers of Agitators not only drew on the revolutionary moral philosophy of Georg Lukács, but also consulted the internationally influential philosopher of Hungarian Marxism throughout the film. At the same time, Szentjo had a different attitude towards Lukács, who was in a complicated situation regarding his position in the party, and in whom he primarily saw the Marxist ideologist of the state party. After a long period of emigration to Germany and the Soviet Union, and then exile in Romania, Georg Lukács was locked back into the Communist Party in 1967, of which he was both a critic and a supporter. His readmission to the party, however, meant that his views and those of his reformist Marxist followers received greater publicity, reinforcing the impression that the ideas of Lukács represented the official ideology. This situation and the perception of Lukács' role was further complicated by the Prague Spring and his stand for his students against Czechoslovak intervention, which brought him under fire in the party. Lukács' followers, the already mentioned Budapest school members, Heller, Fehér, and Markus, themselves came from the leftist tradition and acted for a neo-Marxist philosophy which was at odds with Szentjo's anti-mainstream, anti-communist attitude, despite the ideological correlations between them. Thus it was that the leftist ideas of Marxist origin that would later define Szentjo's entire work did not emerge from the local tradition of the Hungarian left, but from the rise of the international New Left, also inspired by Lukács, around 1968. An important source of Szentjo's leftist turn is the unpublished private correspondence. This is Lukács, as you know. An unpublished private correspondence that survived in the private archives of Gábor Altorjai in Berlin. Altorjai was Szentjo's co-author and friend in the first Hungarian happening in 1966. He emigrated to West Germany in 1967 and informed him firsthand about the German New Left and the collective anti-capitalist actions organized by Wolf Fostel, Beuys, Chris Reinecke, and Jörg Immendorf, whom he worked with. The texts often reveal impatience, frustration, and urging the share of information, while closely following the chronology of the year 68 in a critical approach. The dialogue with Altógyay took place in a comparative manner and was based on a comparison of the current political and artistic events between East and West. On 8th of June 68, he urged Altógyay to go to Paris to experience the black flags of anarchism, the streets covered with traces of strikes, and the traces of direct democracy, a concept that he adapted for his program. His confidence in the emergence of a global new mentality, which was then seen as a real possibility by various groups of the New Left, was linked to pacifism in contrast to the violent partisanship of the revolutionary anarchists. I quote from this letter, "My hope is that you cannot calculate the future. You cannot calculate the mentality of a new generation. I hope now tiny hippies, tiny anarchists, tiny Trotskyists, etc., that a mentality will become worldwide, which will be good for defining against overpopulation in other ways than war." Collectivist revolutionary anarchism played a decisive role in the development of the events of 68. This tendency was a reaction to the increase in the power of the state, the strengthening of the police and the army, and the dominance of ideological apparatuses in the East and West. By this time, disillusion in official communism had become widespread in Eastern Europe, and here too, the critical movements were oriented in a different direction. The invasion of Prague by Soviet groups, however, made it abruptly clear that the countries of the Soviet bloc were not in fact building socialist societies. Under these circumstances, left-wing radicalism, and in particular anarchism, was the credible critical tendency which offered the opportunity for many activists who considered themselves revolutionary to identify with. 1 week after the intervention in Prague, on August 27, Szentjo concluded this trend to Gábor Altógyay, I quote, "In the West, I think the idea of communism has deteriorated, and here we are moving leftward. Czech events push me strongly to the left. You can believe it." Szentjo adjusted his entire linguistic visual program, the so-called parallel course study track, complete with visual poems, action objects, happenings, and actions around the symbolic date 68. Well-known works, such as the Czechoslovak radio or the portable trench for 3 persons. This image is not that well known, and it's in action. That's why I have selected it. It's from a private archive. So this can be interpreted as action objects in solidarity with the Czechoslovak people. The lesser known 1969 environmental action entitled TRAP, which evoked the danger of potential demonstration, can also be classified here. During the action, Szentjo handed out surfer sticks to the audience, who after lighting them chugged and fled throughout the windows to the street. Due to the uncontrollability of the sulfur gas caused by the released substance, the event raised the level of reality of the event to the range of real danger. The programmatic work of the parallel course, entitled Emblem, also from 68, is a wooden box saturated with sulfur, in which lies an everyday carpentry object, a wooden parallelogram marker, which makes it easy to draw parallel lines during the work. The object is as much connected to the spirit of Fluxus as to the philosophy of Béla Hamvas. 30 years later, in his commentary, Szentjo identified the conceptual source of his work, I quote, Here one can speak of the second order effect. I would not have put this surfer in this box if I had not first read Béla Hamvas's text, his text, A Surfer and Other Materials. Quote ends. According to Hamvas's book, Tabula Smaragdina, sulfur is one of the three basic concepts of alchemy, along with salt and mercury, and it is the equivalent of the male sex, the soul, electricity, and activity. Its analogy is blood in the body, passion in the human soul, and alertness in the spirit. But who was Béla Hamvas, whom Szentjo projected as the leading ideologist for his anti-mainstream, anti-elitist movement? The works of Georg Lukács's ideological and aesthetic opponent, based on Eastern mystical philosophy, were distributed in typewritten samizdat by Szentjo and Altóriai and other artists of the underground subculture. In an exhibition organized in 1984 by Otto Mezei, we could conclude that most of the Hungarian artists of the so-called underground somehow were attracted to his ideas, including such figures of the avant-garde like Tibor Hajas or Miklós Erdély. Béla Hamvas, who joined the Communist Party for 3 years after the Second World War, was eventually canonized in the public consciousness as the great loser of the ideological campaign of socialism. The reason behind this can be traced back. I like this image with his parents. I think it's very sweet. So the reason behind this can be traced back to a heated debate with Georg Lukács over one of Hamvas's works on the philosophy of art. In 1947, Hamvas and his wife, Katalin Kemény, published the book Revolution in Art, Abstraction and Surrealism in Hungary, whose fate foreshadowed the marginalization of abstraction after 1956, and whose critique anticipated the realism controversies of the early 1960s. According to Hamvas's thesis, abstraction in Eastern Europe was primarily a human attitude, while Lukács saw abstraction as a confrontation with the centuries-old realist tradition of European art. The parts of Lukács's devastating critique that emphasize the characteristics of Hamvas's Eastern mysticism dictated by, I quote, modern café fashion or the vulgarity of his philosophy are really just ornaments in the clash of two radically different worldviews on the threshold of socialist power change. The main objection to Hamvas was not so much aesthetic as political. I quote from Lukács, "They abstract from the essence of reality. They abstract themselves into nothingness," meaning that they withdrew from the socialist society whose construction had only just begun. Following the debate, Béla Hamvas was forced into intellectual and existential exile and deprived of publishing possibilities. His outspokenness made him more a reference point for the underground, and his essays, distant from current politics, offered a philosophical alternative to the official Marxist discourse. By the early to mid-1960s, however, Hamvas's artistic references had become the closed heritage of modernism in the judgment of the new generation. It was precisely on these issues, the contemporaneity of the new figurativity and collectivism, that Szentjo had a dispute with Béla Hamvas, which the writer did not consider a viable path. For the 69 generation, the central question was to rethink the concept of collectivism, for which, in contrast to Western European models, Szentjo did not consider the practice of political activism to be appropriate. I quote, "I do not mean to say that collectivism is the solution. Collectivism is not a way, it is a goal. Collectivism must be pursued collectively or non-collectively as much today as ever. Despite his sympathy for political art, to which many of his works on human rights issues can be attributed, Szentjo's statement reverses the activist thesis of art and politics. It is not art that must be politicized, but politics that must be made artistic. To quote art historian László Becker, who summarized the methodological essence of Szentjo's opposition to art and politics, art is called art when it is bad, and politics is called politics when it is bad. But if it is ideal, then the two are one. And this is the new quality that Szentjo expects the parallel course to create. Both ends. The most relevant theoretical framework for Szentjo's program was the late Hamas essay entitled 5 Unheard Lectures on Art, the key concept of which is the corrupt reality. In a corrupt reality, instincts are corrupted, and there are no examples to follow, only disintegration and lack of direction. At a critical point, the general quality of existence is, I quote, all journalists and rebel-rousers, footballers and ministers. In the second lecture, he defines art as a medium that constructs a parallel reality, redefining the traditional functions of art and describing it as an activity that intervenes in the functions of life. I quote, art is the proper function of man. It is a life technical activity which, in the midst of a general regression, seeks to save what it can of man. Hamas's theory described the contemporary reality as a period of crisis, which has the possibility and the moral obligation to change. A reality that is not corrupt, unjust, and exploitative, but a reality that is livable for the intellectual man does not yet exist, but must be created. This thesis, projected onto the socio-cultural context of the existing socialism, could have been the inspiration for the aesthetic philosophical concept of the parallel course study track program. To conclude, the utopians of the 20th century approach social reality from several directions. Still, these approaches, at least for the generation emerging in the 60s, did not mean hermetic dissociation, but rather interferences and synthesizing adaptation to different artistic attitudes. The critical tendencies of Marxism were matched by esoteric philosophical and aesthetic concepts in artistic practices that interpreted reality from a critical position, relating it not only to the present, but also to the past and the utopian future. Despite its differing premises, both Marxism and the metaphysical philosophy were able to integrate into the ideas of dissident culture and produced a distinctively hybrid aesthetic concepts by the 1970s. An important feature of the mentality of the 68 generation was its rejection of ready-made ideological agendas, authority, and institutional structures. But, and this is also very important, I think, in its fanatical search for truth, it did not always see the need for self-revision against the alternative ideologies thus constructed. Still, these parallel ideologies nuanced the narratives about the dominance of Marxism and its homogeneity in displacing alternative discourses. Acknowledging their transforming presence in the discursivity of the 60s and 70s can generate alternative discourses on the art history of the period, and hopefully next time in a trans-regional perspective. Thank you very much.